Good morning, everybody. Thank you for inviting me, for giving me the space and the floor. First, for those of you who do not know what WBGU is, that's the acronym for our council. It's the German Advisory Council on Global Change. It is a scientific council. It has 9 members. They get nominated by the federal government, by the cabinet, every 4 years. It's an independent council. And we are writing big reports, usually. And I would like to present this one on cities today. It is our last big flagship report and was finalized, handed over to the government in April this year, and it was a preparation for the Habitat Conference, which you might know took place this week in Quito in Ecuador and ended last night with a new urban agenda. So that was the preparation we did. It was the input for Habitat. And our rationale when we started with this report was the great transformation. We did a big search before the Rio 2012 conference and looked at the trends and the developments in the environmental, political, social sector, and so on, business sector. And we came up with a recommendation that we all, not as a country, not as Europe, but as a world, need a global transformation towards sustainability. And the most urgent topic is to tackle climate change. And when we look at that, we have 3 transformation fields, which are energy, urbanization, and land use, which we need to tackle first because those are the huge contributors to CO2 emissions. So that is where the input came to tackle this, to take up the urbanization topic. And then, of course, we looked at the Agenda 2030 and we looked at the Paris Climate Agreement and tried to make a report of all 3 of those. We are living in the century of the cities. Why do we say so? Well, I would, put it's just a matter of numbers. We have about 4 billion people living in cities today, and we think that we will have 6.5 or 7 billion people in cities by 2050. Today, we don't know exactly when it happened that we crossed the 50% border, but it happened a couple of years ago, and now we are very sure we have more of 50% of the people on the globe living in cities, and we think, or the projections say that we will have 2/3 or 80% of people living in cities by 2050. And this growth comes from the general population growth on the globe. It comes from the extra fast growth in the cities. It comes from the rural-urban movements. It comes from refugees. So we have different types of growth in cities that contribute to this. We have a new and growing urban middle class. We have the refugee topic, of course. So now what do we know about the distribution of this growth and of the distribution of the people who live on the planet? We see that we have 4 pretty stable continents and we have 2 fast growing. The lower blue and, can you see blue and green curve? And the blue and green bars on the bottom stand for Africa and for Asia. So those are the continents that make up for this surge of urbanization and for this fast progress that we are looking at. And this century of the cities, of course, poses a huge number of challenges to us. Right now, we have about 850 million slum dwellers, and we expect to have 1 to 2 billion in 2050, so a huge increase. So that's one type of living in cities, slum or underdeveloped areas. We have another type of cities that is a rapidly planned, newly planned quarters or cities. We have developments in Asia that they build a city like Barcelona in just a couple of years. You just, put it out on the field and build it up. So we expect 1.5 billion people by 2050 living in this type of newly built and newly planned cities and structures. And then we have the third type of cities, which is this one, Barcelona, the mature, the cities that, developed over centuries and that are very stable in some sense, but they are not rapidly changing. So if we think about change, that's a completely different type of city and a completely different type of problem we have to tackle there. So one huge challenge and problem is the environmental impact and the resource demand. And I think this is the most important slide from my presentation. We know that for this growth of people and cities, we need a lot of infrastructure. And the amount of infrastructure we need to build from now until 2050, so in 35 years, is the amount that has been built on the globe, on the entire planet, since 1850. So if we take all that together, that's the amount that has to be built to have a decent life for the people that we just saw that we will probably have on this planet until 2050. We have not found any indication that these projections are false or that we have huge trends that would change the projection or that would, decrease the expected increase in population. And the second very important number is that if we build in this speed, just the materials, the concrete, the building processes and the material we use up will use up almost the budget that we still have left as a planet for the 1.5 degrees. So when you look at the Paris Agreement, we can calculate back how huge is, taking the margin of insecurity, but still we can say how many gigatons could we about have. How much can we use? And so the vast amount of the 1.5 carbon budget that we still have would be just used by the construction materials and by the construction processes. We know that in China alone, between 2008 and 2010, so in 3 years, the construction processes in China used up as much cement that was used in the 20th century in the US as a whole. And that is probably a peak. So we don't have, these types of 3 years developments in China all the time. But I think those numbers are just mind-boggling. And when you see these, it is very clear that sustainable development will be decided in cities, by cities, and by the way we design and develop cities and how we tackle this surge of urbanization and the problem. And of course that means whether we can reach the goals of the Agenda 2030, whether we can reach the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement, and so on. And it's of course a social problem, and it's a very complex, huge picture. And of course we need money. We need more than $50 trillion to tackle this huge problem. But on the other side, you have all the problems in cities. So you have the climate problem, the environmental problem, the social problems. So it's very complicated, and at the same time, it's all on the spot. That just a couple of pictures how different the situation is on the planet, infrastructure, old and new. So, and of course we have the third part of challenges, the social problem. We have huge poverty, we had huge inequality. We heard yesterday that it's growing in parts. We have a huge dignity problem come with that, of course. And you can see all this to a different extent in the cities on the globe. And that means that we do have to strengthen cities and the public administrations, but also the citizens themselves. And we face the challenge that we want to create access to decent housing, to water and sanitation, to energy, to mobility, jobs, inclusion, and we should focus on the lower 40%, the bottom 40% of the global urbanization, because those are the parts of the population who do not have access yet. What did I do? Okay. This is what I would say is the way forward. On the x-axis, you have the Human Development Index, and on the y-axis we have the national ecological footprint. And what we can see coming from the left, we have a number of countries, cities. We have the circles are the degree of urbanization in different countries. So the lower the Human Development Index is, the lower the footprint is. So the higher the development is, the higher up goes the footprint. So we do have a number of cities or countries that are in the okay footprint area, because our goal is to go to the right lower rectangular. That is the space where we all want to be in, high development and low footprint. So we have the lower, sort of not well-developed countries yet, and this corresponds to the SDG agenda, because we have the highly developed countries, but they have high footprints, so they need to transform themselves also. We have to have a development upwards and a development downwards when it comes to consumption of materials and resources. What do you know what others said? When we started our work on urbanization, we looked at all the global reports, and what we found is that there are large consensus in the scientific arena all over the globe and all over the UN organizations, and they agree that we have these challenges and problems like housing conditions, poverty, disparities, that we need infrastructure, traffic, mobility, think about all that, of course, the climate, energy, resources, nexus or efficiency goal. We have to think about planning, about financing, about urban governance, but we have very different strategies, what the report suggested. So some of them are technically oriented, you just need machines or infrastructure money, you can build it. Others say you need to empower people and have the social glasses on, so to say, or they stress the investment needs and finances, the economic perspective, and so we have a layout of different perspectives, but we did not find one overall big picture. What is the direction? Where should we go to? Do we have a common denominator? So we found many solutions in there, like a puzzle, but we found this lack of overall pictures, and we've also found a lack of a set of transaction fields. Which field should we tackle first? What is best to start with? So we started with a compass, and we developed or built a compass to find out, is there a way that we all, given all the differences, that we all together could have a common goal? Where should we go to? And we started with the N part. The N stands for the sustaining the natural life support systems. So we have to take care not to go via or beyond these guardrails. So the human development in general and the urban development on the planet should take place within the planetary guardrails. Then we should ensure inclusion. Inclusion means everybody should be able to take part in the political life, in the economic life, and in the social life. And for that, you need many different things, varying from city to city, maybe, but that should be clear that we hopefully all want to agree on that. That's the proposal of WBGU, that we have the second criteria in the compass. And the third one is what we call Eigenart. It's the German word, and the closest in English is character. And by this Eigenart, we mean the unmistakable individual manifestations of the physical and cultural urban living environments. So it's a criterion that says it is very important that you look at and that you value the specific situation locally. So when we look at Eigenart, we take into account the diversity of cities, the well-being, social cohesion, the creativity and innovation that can be very different in different places. Mm-hmm. And we'll look at how do we create spaces, what kind of spaces do we have, public spaces, green spaces, leisure spaces, and so on. We look at the urban form, we look at the social cohesion. How is it in a given city? How can it work with that? How should it be? We look at what assets do we have to increase creativity? How do people network within a city? How do they communicate? And how do they, create innovation? And so the compass was one, and then we looked at the transformative action fields, and this is what we define them as the areas of urban development which have the biggest potential for leverage effects for the urban transformation towards sustainability. So you could have many more areas, of course, but we thought these are the ones that should be highest ranking in the discussion on urbanization. And many, you can see them, are the normal subjects. Mm-hmm. It's climate change, decarbonization, energy, and all the changes, system changes and transformational changes that come with that. Mobility and transport is one that has not been looked at enough, is what we think, and should be focused on. Urban land use is a big topic. Urban form, which means how do we live, how far away do we sleep and shop and go to the theater and have the kindergarten and school and workplaces. So how do we plan our life as a whole, and how can we adapt, or how should we adapt the urban form to that? Of course, climate change adaptation is a big topic. We have cities that have to deal with extreme heat, with storms, or with rising sea level. So many different problems. Adaptation is another topic. I just talked about poverty reduction, and the socio-economic disparities have to be taken up. Of course, you have the building topic in the education topic in there. Another one, number 7, is materials and material flows. We just talked about the resources that go into infrastructure. So that's the topic of what kind of materials do we use in cities, what do we eat, where do we get the food from, how do we build our houses, what materials, so a huge area. And the last one we suggested is urban health. Urban health is a problem, is a huge area, and of course there is decades of global efforts having gone into the health area. But maybe the aspect was not quite forward-looking yet, and Günther Bachmann yesterday talked about salutogenesis. That's what we suggest. We shouldn't look at, how do you get people less ill, but how can we get them more healthy? What are the factors? How can we create cities that makes people less prone to diseases in the first place? So that's a new aspect in the health area. For all these topics, we need knowledge, we need technology, we need governments, new types of governance, we need power, people in power, institutions that have power to introduce the changes that we need and that we hopefully decide on together. We need finance, capacity, and we talked yesterday a lot about integrated thinking. We have talked so much about we should, and we have to get out of the silos, otherwise we will not be able to reach the goals. So we have a need for integrated thinking, for integrated strategies, and for integrated action. And I think that's the hardest topic ever, because that is not how we are built. Our path of thinking are not that way, the institutions are not that way, politics are not, acting and used to thinking that way, and I think that's the hardest part. We have to relearn and reinvent ourselves, and communicate differently, do many things differently. What's the next one? How much time is left?
3 minutes.
Okay.
You can use 4.
Okay. We can discuss afterwards, so I'll shorten it up. So from these action fields, I brought you one field of land use change. We propose as the goal here, we should ensure that land use is oriented towards the common good. that is a very new, and that's a huge change. We propose that to be one of the overall goals, and we propose to use land more flexibly and to minimize degradation. You can say that very easily, but the question is, how can you get it done? And to get it done, can you read it? It's hard to read. I'll read it to you. We think that we should introduce, and if we not have it already, we should strengthen social impact analysis for land use management. What does that mean? Just look at, what is the land used for, who uses it, how is that new use possible to be integrated on the overall goals of the cities? Does it fit? We should ensure transparency and documentation requirement for land ownership. So whoever buys a piece of land and does something to it, we should ask that that corporation, what are you planning? And, do you respect the needs of the community you are building in? And another big one is we may have the necessity of a land reform. And, to reform the land law, that's a big one and a hard one. But we need to start thinking about that. We surely need to keep enough public space in the cities. We should secure the right of first refusal or veto right for municipalities. So if an investor comes and says, I want to buy a piece of land, I want to build something in your city, we should give this right, secure the right with the municipalities to say maybe no. Of course, they can only say no if they have enough finances, so it's complex, but we should think about this right. We should establish a locally adapted planning system. And another big one is we should fight corruption, ! That's a very huge problem in many places and very hard to tackle. We should push back the problem of or phenomenon of land grabbing, of land and property speculation, and we should and have to newly learn how to do that. Consider a flexible management of land. How can we, change the uses? This is just one little example, but you have the huge recommendations in this land use area. So I just wanted to shed some light on one part. The rest, I need to refer you to the report. And to get all that done, we need a transformative urban governance. We need to enable city governments to do the job they now have to do. And we need to establish a collaboration between governments and civil society and give rights to the cities which they don't have yet. So we propose that we need a polycentric responsible architecture. What does that mean? We have a picture that looks like this in many places, that you have an international community, you have a nation state or national government that talks and negotiates with the international level, and then the things that are often decided on the national level trickle down to the local level. And they have the responsibility to deal with the problem. We think that you have the red arrows also, so you need some negotiation between the local level and the state level, but also from the local level with the international level. And we think you need a direct network of cities in the international arena. So not via the nation state, but city networks that are existent already, but need to be strengthened. And that could make up for a new urban foreign policy, which we don't have yet. We have the normal national foreign policy, but we don't have this extra path yet. Then we need, on the right side, another arena of networks, which is the civil society networks. So it's not just the cities and the institutions and the municipalities, but also the civil society, businesses that should interact with each other and cooperate within the community, but also internationally. So we have some little plants that start to grow there, but a lot of that needs to be empowered, enforced, encouraged, and financed. Coming to finances, up to now we have a situation more or less that we have the central law creation decision processes and the decentralization of responsibility. So you have oftentimes a nation state who says what the local level should do, but with this responsibility move, the finances are not moved. So we have the share of local tax revenues of the national GDP in developing countries that goes to the local level of 2.3%, and industrial countries 6.3%. So a very small share of the national GDPs goes to the local level. We have a huge range of public expenses in cities between here Kenya 1.2% and Denmark 65%. So we need to strengthen the finances. If we do not do that and the administrative capacities, we will not have the power with the cities. I think I'm almost done. Avoid fragmentation. Avoid fragmentation. That's very important. We talked about that yesterday. So if the level you have to act on and the level that has the power or is responsible don't match, then you cannot use it. And I will end now. Thank you so much.
No, thank you to you.
And everything else we have in the discussion. Thank you.
I think. Thank you. Thank you, Inge.